All praises to the Most High, the Creator of creators, the Framer and the Shaper of all. Greetings, and welcome back for the third installment in the Claim of Throne series. Unfortunately, production on this episode was postponed due to major technical difficulties. Shortly after finishing up on part 2, I began the pre-production for this episode. I was planning on releasing part 3 at the beginning of 2020, and half of the production for this episode in regard to the research and material to be covered was already done last fall. So I began working on a few tracks for the background music on some of the segments and transitions. I was in studio mode for a couple of weeks working on music to complement some of the illustrated material in this presentation. After I finished the music, I tried to open the Movie Maker video editor that I've used for all 100 plus videos that I've made and uploaded on this channel to import the background tracks. When I clicked on the Movie Maker video editor icon, the program opened and I received a message stating that it had been discontinued and no support was available for the program. I exited the program and tried to reopen it, and the program was gone. The Movie Maker video editor had completely vanished and it was wiped off of my computer. So for every video that I've made from the very beginning to part 2 of this series, I no longer have access to the Movie Maker video editor that they were created on, or the program format to load the video files and to edit the original material. Needless to say, this was a major setback for my video productions because I was also in the process of re-editing some of my older videos that have been blocked, banned, and taken down. Without the original video editing source, I can't open up the 100 plus video files that were saved in the now discontinued Movie Maker video editor program format in their original layouts to re-edit them. I searched through video editing programs and looked for alternatives for weeks, and then the COVID pandemic hit and shut everything down. The reality set in that I was literally back to square one and I had to start over from scratch. But as always, the Most High provides, and I have an even better video editor for this and future productions. I appreciate the comments and the support that I've received urging me to produce more of the historical research and information that I've covered and shared in this series and others. And as always, I urge you to study and further research the information for more edification. This video presentation is for educational purposes, and all copyrighted material shared in this episode is being used under fair use for the purposes of teaching, research, and commentary. In part 3 of this series, I will cover a few truths, historical facts, theories, and ideologies on the histories of Europe, Asia, and Africa during the early centuries AD through the Middle Ages. Feel free to take notes throughout the video and prepare to pause frequently to digest everything. As you can see from the history, anthropology, and the artifacts shared in the introduction of this video, all throughout ancient Europe to even the Siberian regions were once inhabited by very dark-skinned and richly melanated people during antiquity and prehistoric times. In fact, even scientists suggest that the ancient civilizations of the entire world were all dark-skinned and richly melanated to different degrees until around 6,000 years ago when, according to scientists, the mutation of the gene SLC24A5 caused recessive pigmentation and pale skin among a specific group of people, whose origins are said to be obscure, and who, according to historical accounts, suddenly appeared as if from nowhere from the Caucasus Mountains with no history or written language.
Sodium/potassium/calcium exchanger 5, also known as solute carrier family 24 member 5, is a protein that in humans is encoded by the SLC24A5 gene that has a major influence on natural skin color variation. The NCKX5 protein is a member of the potassium-dependent sodium/calcium exchanger family. Sequence variation in the SLC24A5 gene, particularly a non-synonymous SNP changing the amino acid at position 111 in NCKX5 from alanine to threonine, has been associated with differences in skin pigmentation. The SLC24A5 genes derive threonine or ALA111 THR allele has been shown to be a major factor in the light skin tone of Europeans compared to Africans, and is believed to represent as much as 25–40% of the average skin tone difference between Europeans and West Africans. It has been a subject of recent selection in Western Eurasia and is fixed in European populations. The SLC24A5 gene, in humans, is located on the long arm of chromosome 15 on position 21.1, from base pair 46,200,461 to base pair 46,221,881. NCKX5 is 43kDa protein that is partially localized to the transgal gene network in melanocytes. Removal of the NCKX5 protein disrupts melanogenesis in human and mouse melanocytes, causing a significant reduction in melanin pigment production. Site-directed mutagenesis corresponding to a non-synonymous single nucleotide polymorphism in SLC24A5 alters a residue in NCKX5 that is important for NCKX5 sodium-calcium exchanger activity. SLC24A5 appears to have played a key role in the evolution of light skin in humans of European ancestry. The gene's function in pigmentation was discovered in zebrafish as a result of the positional cloning of the gene responsible for the golden variety of this common pet storefish. Evidence in the International HapMap Project database of genetic variation in human population showed that Europeans, represented by the Ku population, had two primary alleles differing by only one nucleotide, changing the 111th amino acid from alanine to threonine, abbreviated A111T.
One more important piece of the puzzle was found in 2005. When cancer researcher Keith Chang was studying the black and white stripes of zebrafish.
There are a lot of zebrafish in my laboratory because I'm a geneticist and I study how mutations occur, which is how cancer occurs, and I use pigmentation to detect those mutations. By chance, the light skin-colored fish that I used for that research also taught us a lot about how Europeans, how humans became lighter skinned.
What Professor Chang discovered was perhaps one of the most important genetic mutations ever found. A single change among literally billions of coded instructions within zebrafish DNA that reduced black pigment from their stripes. Soon after, this identical genetic mutation was found in fair-skinned Europeans.
There was a magic moment in this research. When I got back the results that showed that the number and the size and the amount of pigment in the light-skinned zebrafish were all diminished, and the same thing happened in humans. When I opened the textbook and saw that same thing, I began to sweat. Not only did light-skinned people evolve from black-skinned people, but lighter-skinned people, whether they're European or whether they're Asian, like me, were actually mutants of the dark-skinned people.
This was remarkable because we had only inferred on the basis of circumstantial evidence that this must have occurred in evolution, but we didn't have any concrete genetic evidence. Now we do.
We begin with a look at the historical accounts of a specific group of people known as the tribes of Gog and Magog, who were sealed off from the rest of the world behind a steel wall in the Caucasus Mountains for their wickedness. As it was written, this specific group of people was sealed away by Alexander the Great of Macedonia, or was it Cyrus the Great of Persia?
Alexander the Great of Greece had to conquer the East to rid the planet of Nephilim. As we had researched in our first videos concerning the Greeks spreading into Europe, we know that the Greeks of Argos, who were in fact Hebrews, the Spartans were Hebrews of the tribe of Dan and others, had spread all along Europe, all the way to Ireland and Scotland and Scandinavia. Now, the fact that the archangel Gabriel gave a prophecy to the prophet Daniel of the Old Testament, this was about 700 BC, concerning the coming of a little horn from the east that would conquer the king of Persia. This little horn was Alexander the Great, in fact. The archangel Gabriel also told the prophet Daniel that he would only live 33 years and that his kingdom would be split not to his heirs, his children, but into 4 divisions to his generals, which is exactly what happened. So he did not go to the west that was already colonized by the ancient Greeks. He went to the east to get rid of the Nephilim. As many important leaders, he also took historians with him that would keep journals of his battles and his trips and his decisions of what he would be doing politically in the areas that he conquered. And all these have been handed down through the ages. One of the saints makes mention of one of these journals, and the disgusting races of mixed humans and animals and demonic beings, the Nephilim, the Anunnaki, whatever you want to call them. They were not human, they were something else, but they were menace to the human race because they were man-eating beings. And this is one of the reasons that Alexander the Great had to go to the east.
In this next segment, I want to go over Darwinism and the theory of evolution and who this actually applies to and what the Out of Africa theory is really all about. Darwinism is a theory of biological evolution developed by the English naturalist Charles Darwin and others. Darwinism is a belief that all species of organisms arise and develop through the natural selection of small, inherited variations that increase the individual's ability to compete, survive, and reproduce, or survival of the fittest. The theory of evolution by natural selection was first formulated in Charles Darwin's book titled On the Origins of Species in 1859. This published proposed thought gave birth to what we know as the theory of evolution today, which is a shortened form of the original term, the theory of evolution by natural selection, proposed by Charles Darwin and Alfred Russel Wallace in the 19th century. According to Darwin, man evolved from the apes of Africa. In his book, The Descent of Man, Volume 1, published in 1871, Darwin presented the idea that human beings evolved from apes. Darwin wrote, "It is therefore probable that Africa was formerly inhabited by extinct apes closely allied to the gorilla and chimpanzee. And as these two species are now man's nearest allies, it is somewhat more probable that our early progenitors lived on the African continent than elsewhere." Darwin also suggested that man is descended from a hairy quadruped, furnished with a tail and pointed ears in Volume 2, page 389. So who was Darwin addressing, and who was he talking to when he wrote, "It is somewhat more probable that our early progenitors lived on the African continent than elsewhere"? It's important to know that Darwin distinguished between the various human races or species of men, and he believed that some were superior to others. For example, Darwin wrote that more civilized races like Caucasians would one day exterminate the more savage races like the Negro and Australians, which he considered subspecies. Darwin also wrote, "Animals whom we made our slaves, we do not like or consider our equal." So, when Darwin wrote, "It is somewhat more probable that our early progenitors lived on the African continent than elsewhere," he was not addressing, talking to, or referring to any of the melanations or people of color anywhere on the earth. Or any so-called black or brown or high yellow American Negro, European, or African Moor or tribesman, no Asiatic Negretto or sunburned Pacific Islander or Australian Aborigine. Or anyone that is called any other term that has been applied to people of color throughout the earth. Darwin was addressing and referring to those who he called the civilized races, his Indo-European colleagues. According to the Smithsonian Magazine, the idea that humans evolved in Africa can be traced to Charles Darwin in 1871. And today we have a lot of people actually believing that the first man originated in Africa because of this theory and hypothesis that Darwin introduced almost 150 years ago. So, why would any person of color believe in and subscribe to this Indo-European theory? Why would you accept being tricked to believe that some mismatched monkey bone fragments that Darwinists conjured up to support their out-of-Africa theory are the oldest remains of a human ancestor? Let's examine the facts. Lucy is a partial fossil skeleton about the size of a chimpanzee, supposedly female, discovered by a paleontologist named Donald Johanson on November 30th, 1974, in Hadar, Ethiopia. The age is estimated to be 3.2 million years old. The find includes a V-shaped jaw, part of a hip and large bones, and other assorted bones with very little skull fragments. According to Dr. Johansen, the hominid walked upright. Her brain size is still small, ape-like in proportion, and most of the other features are predominantly ape-like. Some say that anatomically the specimen is not different than a modern chimpanzee. The jaw has a particular and distinct V shape, which is totally different than human jaws. On November the 20th, 1986, Dr. Johansen gave a lecture at the University of Missouri in Kansas City on Lucy and why he thinks the specimen is the human ancestor. During the Q&A after Johansen's lecture, he was asked some serious questions and a lot of facts and information about this Lucy discovery was revealed. Some information that many of us know nothing about and some facts that will definitely change your perspective. Did you know? When Johansen was asked how far away from Lucy did he find the knees? The knee bones were actually discovered about a year earlier than the rest of Lucy. A year before the discovery of Lucy. A year before the discovery of the Lucy specimen. And Johansen reluctantly answered that the knees were discovered about 200 feet lower than the site where Lucy was found and about 1.5 miles away, a year before the discovery of Lucy's specimen. Please process these facts. A year before Lucy was found, or before the Lucy specimen was found, the knees were discovered. "200 feet deeper in the ground is like digging the length of 2 official NBA basketball courts deep. And 1.5 miles away is like the distance of 30 city blocks. Why were we never taught these facts? Because the supposed 3.2 million year old claim and the entire ideology would have been ridiculed, and this manufactured construct could not have been used to convince the unknowing. That's like coming out of your house and finding a penny on the ground, and then getting in your car and busted about 30 city blocks until you come across a construction site where they are digging 200 feet deep in the ground to build the foundation for a building and an underground parking lot. And you find another penny at the bottom of this dig, and then you say, whoever lost that penny that I found when I was coming out of the house must have lost this penny deep down in this construction site too. These pennies have to come from the same pocket. See how that sounds? However, when you do research the ancient history on the continent of Africa, you will see that there may be some truth in Darwin's theory of evolution and the plausibility that mankind did evolve from the apes of Africa or the troglodyte woodewoops of the African forest.
There are some really interesting points I want to bring out of what I found in my research, and I want to share a little bit of the insight I have on this subject that I already received from a friend in South Africa. Okay, as you can see, this is Africa. Okay, we know that it was very much more a white continent, and I will show you why. But all of this up here, you have all these kingdoms and so forth. Seems a bit odd. Some people looking at these castles and fortresses and things in Africa. What is this doing 500 years ago? More than 500 years ago. Almost 600 years ago. We're seeing all these castles throughout Africa. Okay? All throughout Africa. Many old castles. I mean, this just blew my mind. Alright, this is Africa, and this is the map right side up. You can see Jerusalem. Now again, hold on a second. This looks upside down now, doesn't it? I don't know if you can see, but this is Egypt. You see I think this is an obelisk of sorts. Okay, just so you can first of all see, this is South Africa, people. Alright, let's go down so I can show you a bit more. Alright, so this is the north. This is the north. I hope that's clear. This is the north. Alright, so then this would be the south over here. Anyway, some interesting points on this map. Look at these alien races here, all living under the ground. All the different creatures, all the different monsters. Alright. What are these little eyes? See the eye here? And an eye there, an eye there, an eye there. Eyeballs all over the place, and rivers that come out from them. Here. There were some very important things.
but your grandfather was the founding, one of the founding fathers of the State of Israel?
Yes, he was.
Tell us about this.
Yes, he was. The generation of my grandparents was the generation of the first Jews to take on Zionism as an ideology and take on this idea of establishing a Jewish homeland in Palestine. And he was very active. He became a leader within the movement. He was a member of the de facto Jewish government before the State of Israel was established. And he was one of the signers on the Declaration of Independence when the State of Israel was established.
So that would be, that you can make a contrast, like, let's say he was like the Abraham Lincoln or the,
No,
I'm sorry, George
before
Washington.
that,
I'm
before
sorry
that,
about
the
that.
generation
Like a George
of
Washington.
yes, yes.
Yes. Okay. And then from there, your father actually, he was the general.
My father was, yes, both my parents were born in Palestine, so they were the first generation Israelis, if you will, first generation Jews who were born there. And my father, as a young man, while still in high school, joined the Zionist militia. He became an officer. So in the war of 1948, when the Zionists occupied most of Palestine, he was an officer already. And then he remained in the military as a career officer, and by 1967 he was already a general. And a member of the Israeli Central Command, the High Command.
And usually, because this is a human thing, you know, when you see children who are just being killed, right, and indiscriminately, and then people will make arguments like, look, we're the ones being terrorized, you know, that, you know, we have to defend ourselves, right? This land, we came there, and now they're trying to force us into the ocean. So what do you say when you hear things like this?
Well, it's a complete distortion of the history and a complete distortion of reality. The only reason there's a Palestinian resistance is because the Palestinians were thrown out of their land, Palestine was occupied, and Palestinians live under a brutal regime, which is very similar to the apartheid regime that used to exist in South Africa. Therefore, there is resistance. If that didn't exist, if there was no occupation of Palestine, if Israel did not violently kill and oppress Palestinians, there would be no Palestinian resistance. So you can't blame the victim for resisting. You have to look at what started the conflict. You have to look at the oppressor. You have to look at the stronger power, and the responsibility lies in their hand.
I just had a rabbi give me an analogy. He said, look, imagine you left your home and then someone came and occupied it, and then you try to get it back, and then they went to the judge. Have you heard some of these analogies? Maybe you can.
Yeah, that's assuming that, you know, that's taking it into a place which I don't usually go. That's making the assumption that today's Jews are really the descendants of the ancient Hebrews that used to live in that part of the world some 3,000 years ago. That's a bit of a stretch for me, and even if it was true, I don't think it. I agree with him. It doesn't justify. You know, I did not live there 3,000 years ago. My grandparents immigrated from Ukraine. Their parents, their grandparents didn't live there, and I don't know any Jew that can trace his or her ancestors back to the ancient Hebrews. So that's a lot of, you know, that's a lot of myth there, and I don't think it's relevant. The point is, the Zionist movement was a colonialist movement. It was brutally oppressive, and that is why we have a problem, and that is why there's no peace in Palestine.
We're going to continue. That's one of the myths, that the land was uninhabited. There was no people there.
Yeah.
So if there's no people there, it's not being used, why can't we use it? So this is one of the myths that we're going to be clearing up here on the Dean Show with the General's son, Miko Pilot. Don't go anywhere.
This is really quite bizarre, because all it takes is a little bit of reading of history to find out that this just isn't true.
Thank you. Thank you. And thank you for tuning in to the Dean Show. That was the General's son giving you the facts, not fiction. And I know this is a very sensitive topic for many people, but there is no anti-Semitism going on here. It's just education, and we want the best for all of mankind. So from here, you can go ahead and investigate this further.
Between the Pechenegs and the Khazars is a journey of 10 days through steppelands and forests. There is no main road or beaten track between them and the Khazars. There is only this route through forests and thickets until they reach the country of the Khazars. The country of the Khazars is extensive. On one side is a great mountain chain, and it is the same mountain chain that slopes down at its far end to Tulas and Abkhaz. This mountain chain reaches to the region of Tiflis. They have a king called the Isha and a greater king called the Khazar Kagan. Though he has this name, the Khazars do not take orders from him. The Isha has the power to command and the control of the army, and answers to no higher authority. Their supreme authority is Jewish, and so is the Isha, and those commanding officers, and important men who support him. The rest of them follow a religion like the religion of the Turks. Their city is Sarigashim, and nearby is another city called Karnbalik. The inhabitants dwell in these two cities during the winter, but in the spring they go out onto the steppe and stay there until the onset of winter. There are Muslims in these two cities. They have mosques, imams, muezzins, and Quran schools. Their king, the Isha, imposes a levy of cavalry on the people of power and wealth, in accordance with their wealth and means. They raid the Pechenegs every year. This Isha leads the expedition himself, going with his men on raids. They present a handsome spectacle. When they go out in any direction, they go out fully armed with banners, lances, and strong coats of mail. He rides with 10,000 horsemen, some regular troops, others levied on the wealthy. When he goes in any direction, a sort of disc, like a drum, is carried in front of him. A horseman bears it before him, and he follows, leading the army, who can see the light reflected from the disc. When they take booty, it is gathered together in his camp, and the Isha takes what he likes for himself, leaving the rest to be divided among the troops.
Attila was born into an uncertain and savage world. His people, the Huns, were hardened by a nomadic life of conquer, and their seat of power was under constant threat from the Germanic tribes under their rule. Almost all accounts of the Huns come from their enemies. Jordanes the Goth wrote of them as scarcely human, a savage race who made their foes flee in horror because their aspect was so fearful. Though they live in the form of men, they have the cruelty of wild beasts. Into this world came a man more ruthless, more bloodthirsty, and more terrifying than any before. The Christians thought him sent from hell itself and named him the Scourge of God. His name was Attila the Hun. Attila had to struggle for dominance from an early age. He and his brother Bleda commanded troops from youth and saw bloodshed on the battlefield from their teens. In 434, Attila and Bleda rose to power with the death of their uncle Ruger. The brothers wasted no time in asserting their dominance, forcing the Eastern Roman Empire to sign a treaty 1 year later. Initially, the Romans paid a retainer to the Hun for their services as mercenaries, but under Attila, it would become a form of extortion and coercion. In 440, they broke this treaty and turned their attention to the borders of the Roman Empire and began a bloody assault on the north bank of the Danube. The Hun were feared for their deadly horseback proficiency. A Hun child was raised in the saddle, learning to ride as sure as they learned to walk. Indeed, the first cultures who first encountered them believed them to be half men, half beast, like centaurs. So close was their bond with their horses. Accustomed to the icy steppes of the north, Hun horses were faster, more hardy than the Roman equivalent, stronger, and more resistant to disease. Complementing their maneuverability, Hun bows were a prized weapon. The bows were as beautiful as they were deadly, and could kill at 150 meters, safe from the range of their enemies' weapons. A Hun arrow fired from horseback is estimated to hit with the speed and power of a modern bullet. The Huns tore through the Danube and took Nisus in 443. Such was the bloodshed that the river was said to be bloated with blood and bones of the victims for years to come. They didn't stop here, and through a series of savage mobile campaigns laid waste to the Eastern Roman Empire, reaching as far as Constantinople. Emperor Theodosius, wary of losses, negotiated peace with the Hun once more. Attila knew the surest route to dominance, by spreading terror through the creation of his own legend. A legend built on the bones of his enemies, including his very own brother. In 445, it said that Attila had Bleda murdered in his sleep, and upon his death, took control of the entire Hun Empire. This empire was a melting pot of different tribes and cultures, 500,000 barbarians, any of which could vie for power in a moment of weakness. They had to be controlled with a ruthless iron fist. Attila exploited and amplified his reputation at every opportunity. He arranged with enemy forces for deserters to be returned to him for punishment, where they were executed as warning to others. In 446, Attila's forces descended like a swarm across the Black Sea and pillaged, desecrated, and slaughtered their way across the Mediterranean. He's said to have been observed laughing from horseback, eyes wide with glee at the slaughter. He rampaged through Greece and Eastern Europe, sacking and conquering over 100 cities. It was said that the dead were countless. By 450, Attila was in almost unmatched power in the Eastern Roman provinces. Knowing this, and seeking to escape an arranged marriage, the sister of Western Emperor Valentinian III wrote to Attila, appealing for his aid and proposing an alliance. Attila, taking this as a wedding proposal, used the plea to his advantage. He claimed the proposal legitimate and demanded half the Western Roman Empire as dowry. When he was inevitably refused, he used it as the excuse he'd always wanted and attacked the Roman heartland. He entered Gaul and attempted to put Orleans under siege. However, a Roman general, Flavius Aetius, had managed to do the unthinkable by uniting Rome with their traditional enemies, the disparate tribes of the Visigoths, Alans, and Burgundians. Together, they stood against the crashing tide of the Hun in one of the most decisive battles in history. For the first time in his rule, Attila's forces met their match, and after a long and brutal battle, now known as the Battle of the Catalonian Plains, the Hun were finally pushed back. The battle was so vicious, the soldiers had to sate their thirst from rivers thick with blood and gore. Attila could not be subdued for long, however, and the following year the Scourge of God struck once again, attacking Italy and Rome itself. Once again, towns and cities quaked before him, many refusing to stand in opposition, such was now his reputation for savagery. Finally, at the gates of Rome, Emperor Valentinian sent a delegation to brook for peace. Wary, Attila's army succumbing to disease, and his homeland threatened by the Eastern Roman Empire behind him, he performed his last great coup. Attila demanded gold and safe passage to his homelands, and received them. Returning home, and never one to settle, Attila took yet another wife. In the tradition of the Huns, the wedding was a raucous and drunken affair, and Attila, now some 50 winters old, was not the drinker he once was. He passed out on his back in his wedding tent. When he was discovered, he had choked to death on his own blood. Attila was honored in death, sealed in 3 great coffins of iron, silver, and gold, and interred in a secret location, still a mystery to this day. In keeping with a life of savage violence, the men who interred Attila were slain, that Attila the Hun's final resting place be lost to time. Even in death, Attila wrought death.
The establishment of Israel. In 1947, the Palestine question came before the General Assembly of the United Nations.
The Arabs of Palestine cannot go into any political discussion on the basis of any Jewish state in Palestine.
Surely the Jewish people is no less deserving than other peoples. Are the Arabs responsible for that problem? Have they acted or worked or helped in creating such a problem? The Jewish people were your allies in the war and joined their sacrifices to yours to achieve a common victory.
The admission of the applicant, if taken, would be the highest consummation of injustice.
Argentina? Abstention? France? Yes?
The resolution was adopted by 33 votes, 13 against, 10 abstentions.
On May 14, 1948, the British government terminated its Palestine mandate, and on May 15, 1948, David Ben-Gurion declared the independent state of Israel.
שוקת זכותנו הטבעית וההיסטורית, ועל יסוד החלטת עצרת האומות המאוחדות, אנו מכריזים בזאת על הקמת מדינה יהודית בארץ ישראל.
Eastward, the Arab Legion poised for invasion on the Transjordan border. King Abdullah reviewed a brigade of reinforcements from Iraq.
Immediately, a coalition of armies from Egypt, Syria, Jordan, Iraq, Saudi Arabia, and Lebanon invaded the new Jewish state. The war was marked by long periods of fighting and temporary ceasefires, with hostilities officially ending in January 1949. At that time, Israel held 5,600 square miles of territory allotted in the UN partition plan, plus an additional 2,500 square miles, while Transjordan held the eastern sector of Jerusalem and the West Bank, and Egypt held the Gaza Strip. The Muslim states refused to negotiate peace or recognize Israel's right to exist, and remained in a state of war with Israel. Islam's Jewish problem reemerges. Muslims reacted to the Jewish victory with shock. It caused a theological challenge of the greatest scope imaginable. Islamic-Jewish military conflict had now reoccurred with opposite results. While the Muslims of the first Ummah in Medina had defeated the Jews had now achieved political independence, overcome Muslims in battle, and ruled over Muslims in a land that was taken by Dar al-Islam at the outset of the great conquests. The Jews were known to be weak, cowardly, impure, and condemned by God to humiliation. Such people were not supposed to defeat them. A Jewish state was the ultimate insult and degradation, whereby protectors became tributaries, and tributaries became protectors. While Islam's initial victory over the Jews in the time of Muhammad was a sign of coming conquests and divine vindication, it was feared their defeat by the Jews might signal the final demise after a decline of 300 years. Hence, Muslims considered the founding of the State of Israel to be a Nakba, a catastrophe of historic proportions.
We're not going to deal with the white people from Eastern Europe because those white human beings called Russians went over the Ural Mountains heading west and equally did to those Asians what the Western Europeans did to us. So you had the white people split in two halves. Those you call Western Europeans, English, French, Spanish, Portuguese, German, they left. They conquered what you call America, the Caribbean, and Africa, and the Pacific. But the other half of them, those white Russians, crossed the Ural Mountains from 1300 and began to conquer what is now parts of Pakistan, India, China, and they killed off and exterminated those people in Asia you call Eskimos, Ainus, people of color. That's how Russia got its power and its strength. So you had two parallels. But here we're going to deal with the western part. So as you begin to, and if you look at the map here, what we're saying is those Europeans from Western Europe came out in this portion and went in this direction. But you also had white people calling themselves Russians who after 1300 began to cross the Ural Mountains. And in the age of conquest, what they were doing to us here, what they did was these white Russians went in and conquered these Asian people, the Iranians, the Pakistanis, the Mongolians, the Ainus, and others. And they, those white Russians from 1300 to present, conquered Asia. They came out of Asia and they went across and conquered Alaska. And the Russians were trying to almost conquer Hawaii. So you had a dual conquest on both ends. So anyone who tells you that the Soviet Union is your friend, as European, look at the history, you see that's nonsense. Let's go back briefly to see who the English are. The Spanish, the English, and the Germans. When you look at the history of Europe, approximately 400 AD, a group of Europeans coming from the northern part of Europe, which you call Scandinavia, Sweden, Denmark, Norway, Finland, and what you call Russia and Denmark. They came down in a series of invasions starting at 400 AD and they smashed the Roman Empire. These invasions continued to push 500 AD, 600, 700, 800, 900, and they kept pushing down into Central Europe. When these groups of people who are beginning this invasion, they're called Germanic people. They will come in and exterminate the Europeans who are presently there, which were primarily Romans and Celts. Those Europeans you call Germanic people. Three sets of these German people would go into what is now England or Great Britain. England and Great Britain was previously occupied by a group of Europeans called Celts, who are now survived as the Irish, the Scottish, the Welsh. So those Germans invaded into what you call England. The three groups that invaded the German groups are Angles, Saxons, and Jutes. They will come in and invade what you call England and exterminate the Irish or the Celts. Their name will change into Englishmen. And when these Englishmen come to America, the name of these people will change to Americans. So the point that I want to point out to you, and you see this scheme, that Americans are Englishmen. Englishmen are Germans. They're Jutes, Angles, and Saxons, no different than Hitler. So let's clear in your mind about who these Europeans are you call an American. They come from Germany. Two groups went into France, two German groups, the Burgundians and Franks. They exterminated most of the Celts there, and what Africans were there, and they are now called Frenchmen. So Frenchmen are Germans. Another group, two groups went into northern Italy and northern Spain. They are called the Visigoths and Vandals. Those white English, the white Spanish, and the white Italian, the white from Yugoslavia, they're Germans. Another group of Germans will move to the west. That group is called the Rus, R-U-S. They will comprise your white Russian, your Boris Yeltsins. So let's get a frame of reference historically clear that those Europeans who now you recognize as Englishmen, Americans, Germans, French, Spanish, Italian, Russians, they're all Germans. Racially, they are the same. There's no distinction. So don't mix them up about one of your colonizers is better than the other. Okay. It is these Germans, when they were able to occupy and conquer and control all of Europe, when they were able to kill off the Celts, push the Moors out, push the Arabs out from Yugoslavia, and push the Turks out, and they finally got control of Europe in its entirety. They fought each other from that point. What was the wars that these German tribes fought? We go back 1600, the 30-year war, the 100-year war. The Napoleonic Wars in 1800, there was England, France, Russia, and Germany, all cousins fighting each other. That Napoleonic War, they blamed on Napoleon. It was a pan-European war, these Germans fighting among themselves. You go on to the Franco-Prussian War. So all of last century, from 1800 to 1900, was one series of a war in Europe, from one end of Europe to the other. They're killing each other. They continue this intra-ethnic war as World War I. Again, the same group, England, France, Germany, Russia, and they added their cousins in Yugoslavia.
I want to share an observation that I made in researching the history and the origins of the surnames. According to the history, tribes of barbarian, Indo-European or Germanic people began invading Europe around 400 AD, a little over 1600 years ago. When you research the surnames from the countries and the origins of many of the people who now inhabit the lands in Europe, we see Now, understanding that the ancestors of many of these people invaded and began usurping Europe around 1600 years ago, we don't see these ancestral surnames from their lands and regions of origin in places like Britain or England. The most common surnames are Smith, Jones, Williams, Taylor, Brown, Davis, Wilson, Evans, Thomas, and Johnson. So how did the same people coming from the Hyperborean, Tartarian, Mongolian, and Siberian regions into what is now Russia, Scandinavia, Ukraine, Poland, Romania, Serbia, Bulgaria, Croatia, and Bosnia with these ancestral surnames? Today become the Smiths, Williams, Browns, Taylors, Jones, Johnsons, etc. How did this happen? When you research the people who historically inhabited the ancestral lands and regions of the Mongols and Tartars, you get reference of their origin from the book Historical Researches on the Conquest of Peru, Mexico, Bogota, Natchez, and Telemico in the 13th century by the Mongols, which states that Alonzo Khan had twin sons, the one Tatar, from whom the Tartars take their name, and the other Mogul, or more properly Mongol, between whom he divided his dominion. So we see, according to the historical researchers, the surname Khan fathered the twin Mongols and Tartars. When we look at the surnames of their descendants still living in these lands and regions today, we see these Mongolian surnames in what was once the Mongol Empire, which at its height covered 9 million square miles of territory with an estimated population of 100 million people. And these Tatar Turkish surnames in what was once the Khanate of the Golden Horde under the Mongol Empire, which included most of Eastern Europe, Russia, and Siberia from the Ural Mountains to the Danube River that flows from the Black Forest of Germany to the Black Sea near the Ukraine, and it extended east deep into Siberia, and to the south in the lands bordered on the Black Sea and the Caucasus Mountains. Now, as these people from the Arctic or Nordic regions continue to invade and usurp places like Denmark, Germany, Italy, Spain, Portugal, France, England, and Ireland, many of their ancestral surnames were changed or exchanged for the common and popular names that we now see in these countries today that were assimilated from the original people. Keep in mind that history tells us that when these barbaric and nomadic people began entering Europe, they had no written language. Here's an exercise in critical thinking and common sense. According to recorded history, barbaric and nomadic people, carriers of the SLC24A5 gene, who had no written language, came from the Arctic regions and the Siberian steppes and began invading Europe around 1600 years ago. And today their descendants still living in these territories or countries in Europe that they originally usurped and settled in have ancestral surnames like these. Groups of these barbaric and nomadic people began infiltrating, assimilating, and usurping the richly melanated civilizations throughout Europe. And today they have surnames like Smith, Jones, Williams, Taylor, Brown, Davis, Wilson, Evans, Thomas, and Johnson. Yet, when you research for any of these surnames in their ancestral regions, you don't see surnames like Smith, Jones, Williams, Taylor, Brown, Davis, Wilson, Evans, Thomas, or Johnson. So the question becomes, whose surnames are whose? Do these surnames belong to barbaric nomadic people invading Europe with no written language, or do these surnames belong to the richly melanated people who already had written languages and who already inhabited the countries, territories, and civilizations throughout Europe for eons? Just asking for a friend. Let me make it make sense. Take, for example, the surname Blakemore. According to the House of Names, the surname Blakemore is part of the ancient legacy of the Anglo-Saxon tribes of Britain. Anglo-Saxons. Question: how did these barbaric tribes come up with these names when they had no written language? Who named them? Why are the images of the Saxons on the coins and the coinage of medieval Saxony depictions of the people that they call Negroes? So is Blakemore a British Saxon name that was assimilated and usurped by the Angles? Who are the Anglos? Let's examine further. According to the Encyclopedia Britannica, 9th edition published in 1889, which is often called the Scholars Edition, it states, under authority of Bede, who was better known as Saint Bede the Venerable, an English monk who was a theologian, historian, and chronologist until his death in 735 AD. As Saint Bede wrote the Ecclesiastical History of the English People, a source vital to the history of the Anglo-Saxon tribes' conversion to Christianity, which began in 597 AD at the end of the 6th century. Under authority of Saint Bede the Venerable, Encyclopedia Britannica continues, the Saxons, he tells us, and he is followed by the authors of the Saxon Chronicles, were situated in what is now Holstein, which is Germany's northmost state. The Angles occupied to the north, and this map illustrated the Old Saxony in Germany and the early century Saxony of Britain, just as St. Bede stated. The Angles or Anglos occupied the land to the north. However, when we look at the depictions and the images of the medieval Saxons of the Old Saxony in Germany, you see historical artifacts like coins and statues of people that Blumenbach classified as Negroes. This raises a few questions. Throughout history, we see images and likenesses of the original dark-skinned people around the world that now have been altered and whitewashed to create a reconstructed history. So, is it feasible to assume that what we see today has always been that way? Or does all of the overwhelming evidence of a very dark past even resonate? The entire period that is called the Dark Ages was just that. The ages when dark-skinned people ruled Europe. Because when you do the research and fully understand that history states the barbaric and nomadic people who invaded Europe were illiterate with no written language, and according to the historians, the written sources for the early years of the invasions are rare or non-existent. I wonder why. Was it because the invading people were illiterate and couldn't read or write to record their exploits and conquests? Surely you would want to document and record that. Did these barbarians and vagabonds infiltrate, live among, and assimilate the spoken and written languages of the dark-skinned people that already inhabited the land, and then ultimately usurp these kingdoms and countries that they now inhabit today? Or was Europe always what it is today, and gradually over time, dark-skinned people began producing ancient bones and artifacts that somehow have scientists today confirming that they are older than anything on the continent? Now, if these Saxons of Saxony depicted themselves as dark-skinned or melanated people, which are the same people that Blumenbach classified as Negroes, how did they become pigment recessive and void of hue as Bretons? Who were the Bretons?
Shalom, and welcome to another edition here on the Genesis 49ers page, where we say no to vague interpretation and we give thorough breakdowns. Shalom, and welcome to another edition here on the Genesis 49ers page, where we say no to vague interpretations and we give thorough breakdowns. Today's topic is the Black Britons. Ancient Britain. The black people of Britain, okay? Of ancient Britain, of antiquity. Now, a lot of people watching this video that's not familiar with the material or familiar with the ancient epochs of Britain are probably looking at the title like, oh, that's crazy. White people always have lived there. And the only reason you come to that conclusion because you grew up in a white supremacist system where anything outside of Africa is white in your mind. But we're here to take away the vague interpretations and give you thorough breakdowns. And give you the truth and the history regarding this. Because you're not going to be taught this in school. Okay? You're not going to be taught this in college. But we're going to give you the truth. Okay? I'm going to fight against what Bloomberg has spread within our communities. Which is the saying, African is nigger and nigger is African. So anything that's dealing with a dark-skinned man and woolly hair has to be an African, no matter what. That's what we've been taught. I'm going to hew that down. I'm going to thoroughly hew that down. So today's topic is Black Briton, a legacy of the Negroes. Let's get right into it, family. First slide, the Moors. In Africa, the Moors continue to be a leading power and to no little extent India. Also, they dominated the Mediterranean and the North Atlantic and plundered the coast of Western Europe and the British Isles. Now, that's from Nature Knows No Color Line by J.A. Rogers, a profound scholar, page 69. Now, we know these people ruled in Europe because to the right you can see Negroes and heraldry. Heraldry is for ruling families. Okay? So they ruled. And guess what? Mauritania was full of Jews. And I got future videos that's going to bring out these Jews that were inhabiting the western tip of Africa in ancient Jewish societies that was in Mauritania. Okay? We just had some Jews that converted into Islam out of fear, and some just wanted to do it to amalgamate within the system and rise into high positions and offices within the system of the Moors. We understand that. So you had Jewish Moors and you had Islamic Moors. But that's for another video. I just want you to key in and hone in on the fact that these Moors were ruling in Europe. Okay? And they ruled the British Isles. Moors, they even conquered and ruled parts of Scotland. David McRitchie, an eminent British archaeologist, says, so late as the 10th century, 3 of these provinces were wholly black. And the supreme ruler of them became for a time the paramount king of the transmarine Scotland. We see one of the black people, the Moors of the Romans, in the persons of the king of Alban of the 10th century. History knows him as Kenneth, sometimes Dub, and as Nigger, which means black, and Dub means black. Kenneth the Dub means Kenneth the Black. And he was one of the prominent kings of Scotland. Okay, and that's written throughout the annals of history. We know this. And that's also Nature Knows No Color Line, page 69 to page 70. I'm going to be quoting him a lot throughout this presentation. And to the right, you can see an image, courtesy of The Last King of Scotland. Okay, which is a movie based in Africa, but it's just the title and the depiction of a king of Scotland was being black. I had to put it in the presentation with Forrest Whitaker playing as that king. Next slide. Dub. We know as a historical fact that nigger, or L-Dub, has reigned over certain black divisions of our islands. Now, I want to stop there because the reason I'm saying nigger or neger, that's the proper pronunciation of that word because it's a Latin word. In Latin, N and I will make the ni sound, not the ni sound. It will make the ni because the I makes the E sound in Latin.
Negro.
So it'll be nigger or nigger.
Negro.
Okay, so El Dub has reigned over certain black divisions of our islands and probably white divisions also, and that a race known as the Sons of the Black succeeded him in history. Welsh traditions, he said, now remember this is the 10th century, so not 900 circa era, right? If a nation known as the Sons of the Black preceded him, okay, you had black people ruling in Britain for a long period of time, a long epoch of time. That's why a lot of you can't believe that King James was black. In the Jacobean era, that was black people ruling. You can't believe it because you haven't been taught this history that black people were all through Europe before Israelites came there as well. Because what you're going to learn is the Japhetic children that were throughout Europe were originally dark skinned. That's why when you look at the earliest depiction of a Negroid person, and I covered this in my video, Japhet is Black, it's found in the Mediterranean. The earliest depiction of a Negroid person outside of Africa is found in the Mediterranean. In Europe, the Etruscans, right, the ancient Greeks, they're all depicted as being black in Neolithic times. That's going past 3000, before 3000 BC, around that era. So, subscribe to Genesis 49ers because we're going to keep giving you these facts and historical gems. So, it says, in that a race known as the Sons of the Black succeeded him in history. Welsh traditions, he says, tells also of these black people in the legends in the history of the Scottish Highlands are both witnesses to the existence of a purely black people there. And that's from Nature Knows No Color Line by J. Rogers, page 70. So you had a history of black people, legends of black people living there, and black people continue to live and rule in these islands, the British Isles, right? You had a continuation, if you will, a continuity, if you will. So black people always was there. It wasn't until after colonial times and after Edomite Byzantine empires, because the Byzantine Empire was once a all-black empire, but then you had Isaurians invade and, interrupt the continuity of that kingdom. And that's where you start seeing the pale people coming into that kingdom. Moving on. So Eber, it says, what we do know also is that the Phoenicians, a Negroid people, did mine tin in Cornwall, that the Egyptians went to Britain before the Romans. Gerald Massey gives abundant proof, including Egyptian words and ancient British languages. The Silures, or Western Britons, mentioned by Tacitus of the 1st century as having dark skins and usually curly hair, were very likely of Phoenician or Egyptian descent. Nature Knows No Color Line, page 71. And to the right, you see more Negro imagery, okay, dealing with Europe. Now, we're going to get to the actual quote of Tacitus, the historian, 1st century historian, and it's dealing with the Silures. It says the swarthy faces, swarthy means dark, okay? When you see the word swarthy, it means dark, and that's also where you get the surname Stuart from. When we talk about King James, he was of the Stuart family, which denotes dark skin, swart, okay? The swarthy faces of the Silures, the curly quality in general of their hair and the position of Spain opposite their shores, attest to the passions of the Iberian on old days and the occupation by them of these districts. And that's in the Annals of Tacitus. Book 11, chapter 2, translated by M. Hutton. To the right, you can see coinage of Iberian Negroes. This is undeniable. You had dark-skinned people, black people, if you will, because there's no such thing as a race of black people. The whole world was black at one point, and that consisted of different races. Again, a continuity of black rulership in the British Isles. Tacitus wrote about these dark-skinned people living in Britain, which we teach that the word British is Hebrew, because Barit means covenant in Hebrew. Aish means man. So if you say you're British, you're a man of the covenant. Moving on. Welsh. Ancient Welsh folk tales certainly do mention black people, unmistakably Negroes, in the history of Peredur and the Mabinogion. The blacks mentioned therein might be Salors. Another ancient Welsh poem, Gawad Lud y Mawar, tells of a robbery between white and black, and that's Nature Knows No Color Line, page 71. So we can clearly give historical references of black, dark-skinned people living within these areas, Scotland and the British Isles, to attest to it, of a black continuity. Next slide. Moors. Mac Ritchie adds that the legends in the history of the Scottish Highlands are both witnesses of the existence of a purely black people there. Boswell and Dr. Johnson saw the descendants of these black people when they visited Scotland in his journey to the Hebrides. September 1st, 1773, Boswell wrote of one clan, the McCraes. Some were as black and wild in their appearance as any American savage whatsoever. So he said these people were black, and this was in 1773. Martin, who had visited these western islands 80 years before Boswell, said of the people of Jura, black of complexion. Of Islay, general blacks, and of Iran, generally brown and some of black complexion. The use of brown for some shows very clearly that when he had said black, he meant black, as in very dark, right? Also, Robert Knox in 1850 mentions a small colony of mulattoes living in Minch, Moor, Scotland, the offspring of Negroes and white women. And that's Nature Knows No Color Line, page 79. J.A. Rogers put in that work, man. He was a real scholastic teacher. He was a scholar. But to the right, you have King Edward III of England. He ruled circa 1400s. And they depict him as being a Negro. In the 1400s, can you believe it? Let's go. Next slide. Dance. It says, also still another proof of early Negroes in England is that the Moorish dance, English national dance, is of an African origin. It might have been brought over by the Moors with the Romans, and it seems certainly by the Moors with William the Conqueror in 1066. Sir John Hawkins, an earlier authority on music, says it is indisputable that this dance was the invention of the Moor. Its Negro origin is further seen in that white dancers blacken their faces to dance it. The Moresca, says Paul Nettle, was originally a dance of the Negroes or Moors and the pantomime of one or more Negroes in blackface. Nature Knows No Color Line, page 82. And we get the image from a YouTube video to the right of them actually practicing this to this day. To commemorate who? The Moorish people that ruled those different locales. My channel here is built to edify and to educate you, brothers. And this is what we're going to continue to do here on Genesis 49ers. Dealing more with the Moors, it says Siebermacher's Wappen book of 88 volumes already mentioned has a great number of Negroes, some of them with crowns and others as cardinals and archbishops. So I'm going to stop there. They had crowns. What does that mean? Coronation was involved, meaning they had became kings. of these different locales and different city-states and different governments. So they had crowns and cardinals and archbishops, meaning they were heads over churches and religious institutions. Meaning this is not the laity we're talking about. We're talking about the kings. We're talking about the heads of the society. The clergymen. These were all black people. With these Negroes and German nobility. These Negroes are what? German nobility. Now, a lot of people talk about German. When they think about German, they think of a white person, a Nordic, as they say. But we have a history and a continuity of black people ruling Germany as well. The evident Negro strand in Queen Charlotte Sophia, consort of George III of England, who was a German princess, might be explained. She was Negro, but she was a German princess. Showing you can't judge people's race based on their locality. That's what's wrong with DNA. DNA is a very circular argument. They judge the people by the place and the place by the people. You can't do that because people migrate, people rule, people take over different cities and move people out. I.e., what happened when the king of Assyria came into Northern Kingdom? He moved a lot of our people out and brought them into Assyria and the cities of the Medes. So you can't just go off of land, locality, and stuff like that. You can't base everything off of that. You need records. You need archives to prove what race or ethnicity someone is. You can't just go off of a magic trick called DNA. Don't be fooled by that, brothers. It says, who was a German princess might be explained. Negroes, some with crowns, also appeared in the coat of arms of German and other European cities and provinces. Alt-Oting of Bavaria has a black Madonna. Coburg has the Negro Saint Maurice. And in Kommensburg, Mark Fletcham, Austria, a jet black Negro as Saint Peter, holding the keys of the kingdom. So they recognized that Peter was a Negro. Now, what race and nationality was Peter? He was a Jew. And the early depictions of him were black. A jet black Negro. In the text, he is called a Moor. That is German then for Negro. So they recognize these people as Negro. And like in my video, the Sephardic Negro Jews, the picture for that video is actually a stained glass picture of Daniel, and that's in Germany, by the way, and he's depicted as being black. So when you hear about Hitler knowing that the Jews were Negro, he really didn't have to go that far and do too much research, because the stained glass and frescoes and arts and statues teaches him that in his own city, in his own state. So that's from Nature's Knows No Color line by J. Rogers, the profound scholar. And that's page 93. If you're watching this channel and you have not purchased this book yet, this video should behoove you to purchase this book. He puts that work in. He gives you the scholastic evidence to back these things. See, here on Genesis 49ers, we don't just buy books to claim we own books. We buy books to get the meat out and deliver it to the people. We read these books. Your book should have highlights, notes. You should be reading these books and bringing it to the forefront. They didn't make these books to conceal this knowledge. They made these books to expound upon this knowledge and give it to our people. Next slide. More for Negro continued to be in general use in England until at least the 18th century. Nathaniel Bailey, compiler of the first English dictionary, has more. Nature Knows No Color line, page 73. You can see a bust of a blackamoor to the right. Let's deal with race. This is Claudia Rufinia, and those who are not privy who Claudia Rufinia was, she was basically an English princess, a princess of England, right? And her son became the quote-unquote first bishop of Rome. First century. This is first century information, and this is what they wrote about it. Claudia Rufinia raised beneath the sun that shines on Britain's dark cerulean race. So this attests to what? That Britain had dark inhabitants, and cerulean is like a bluish color, a dark bluish color. So these people were black living in Britain in the first century AD. So Anglo-Israel by William Henry Poole, page 258 is where you can find that quotation, and it's translated from the Latin. Next slide, and final slide, because you have to understand something. For all you people that look at Europe as being always white, like it's been white since the beginning of time, even though we have abundance of evidence to disprove that. They are finding Negroid skeletons and skulls that mainstream scientists are claiming that are the oldest bones in Europe. So we got to step our scholarship up. What's the slogan of the channel? Genesis 49ers, we say no to vague interpretations and we give thorough breakdowns. Professor Lipp says, long before Europe set forth her emissaries in history to discover and capture the colored world, that world had pent the white man in his own land. The age of discovery, after all, but the bursting of the chain which the colored people had put around the white. So he's attesting to what? Professor Lipp is attesting to that this world was ruled and dominated by people of color for an epoch of time, until what we know as the Renaissance is when they fully was able to take that chain that we had on them off of their necks and free themselves. That includes Britain, England, Germany. We was all over those locales and ruling, okay, for an epoch of time. And that's Nature Knows No Color Line, page 222. We read these books, brothers. Read your books, take notes. They have jewels in them. We need to bring them out and put them on the forefront. Habakkuk 3:2 says, O Lord, I have heard thy speech and was afraid. O Lord, revive thy work in the midst of the years. In the midst of the years make known, and wrath remember mercy. In the Middle Ages, the Lord had mercy on us. He revived his work, which is his people, and allowed us to rule and reign. In the Middle Ages, what is known as the Middle Ages. And we went through Europe and ruled. We went through Africa and ruled. Mauritania, the ancient Songhai empires, Gaio. If you look at these old maps, it has the exiled Jews located in Africa on the west coast. Why is that there? We ruled these different localities, okay, and different city-states within the Middle Ages. Now, that was corruption. I might make a video about that, the historians interrupting that and introducing whitewashing of our images and stuff of that nature that interrupted that around the 4th century, then back 7th, 8th century, 9th century, and wars continued after that. But this has been Genesis 49ers. We brought out the truth behind the ancient black Britons and of Scotland. I pray that you took notes. Like the video, subscribe if you haven't subscribed yet, share the video on the social media platforms such as Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and let's get this truth out there, man. Genesis 49ers. Signing off.